G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Thought I'd make a movie responding to 55 Ella 2007 K, who's been making some movies to people like The Skeptical Heretic and UnseenPerfidy, who's the proximal cause of this movie. Ella, I'm really impressed with the way you can talk to these self-righteous dingbats. That they have an incredibly one-eyed, shallow, arrogant, ignorant, hubristic view of the universe. This UnseenPerfidy character that you're responding to in your most recent upload regarding UnseenPerfidy, I went and had a look at his movie, the 15-minute job. He dropped some enormous clangers, like the essence of his belief seems to be that might is right, and that American exceptionalism means that there's no such thing as an ethical or moral dilemma, and all the other countries are allowed to do whatever they like because America wins in the end. You can have your spies, but America's got better spies. And he come up with a really ridiculous idea to the effect that if only America had have had better intelligence and surveillance community and assets before the Second World War, they might have been better aware of what the Japanese had in the pipeline, and thus and because the World War would have gone on for less time. And that kind of indicates that he's never done any history or studied the period in question or found out what the hell actually happened. From memory, just off the top of my head, during 1941, it was a US Coast Guard or US Navy Catalina which located the battleship Bismarck and radioed its position to the British Navy. I think it was 6 months before America became part of the Second World War. I mean, Lend-Lease was going on. America was shipping supplies to both England and Holland for the Dutch East Indies, and Russia. Operation Barbarossa had started, but America was not in the war, unquote. So what the hell was an American Catalina doing, shadowing a German battleship and telling the British Navy where to send their ferry swordfish torpedo bombers? The fact is that Churchill and Roosevelt had already made a pact on board a destroyer in the middle of the Atlantic when they said Germany first. They knew they were going to have a war with Japan, but they were going to concentrate on Germany first. In December 1941, the US Naval Intelligence Department had such a good grip on the Japanese codes, they had such a perfect understanding of when the attack was coming, that they left their aircraft carriers there until the day before, so that the Japanese human intelligence assets, i.e. spies on the ground in Hawaii, could confirm to Tokyo through their own means that yes, the aircraft carriers are there. Tokyo gets the message, gives the final go-ahead for the attack. All the aircraft carriers steamed out and left nothing but a lot of useless bloody battleships and outdated World War I vintage coal-fired destroyers bought, from the British. That's all there was to be bombed. There was nothing that mattered in Pearl Harbor, nothing but a big, fat, juicy propaganda target to suck the American population into an immediate war fever and cause a record number of enlistments, most of whom were trained and shipped over to North Africa. Yes, to invade Tunis. And then after Tunisia there was Sicily, and then Italy, and after Casino bogged down there was Anzio, and then of course it was time to go off and practice for D-Day, fight lots of Germans, even though you signed up for the Japanese menace. Yeah. The American intelligence community had a really good grip on what the Japanese intentions were. UnseenPerfidy, you halfwit. The American intelligence community didn't notice that if they kept pushing to the Yalu River, the Chinese were going to get involved in the Korean War. The American intelligence community were the ones who identified Ho Chi Minh as being the one nationalist leader most likely to be able to organise and recruit and mobilise a nationalist army to defeat any conquering invading power. That was in 1944 when they started arming and training Ho Chi Minh. And yet it was the American CIA who was surprised when the Viet Minh beat the shit out of the French at Dien Bien Phu. It was the Australian intelligence community that noticed that Vietnam, South Vietnam, was going to fall over on its arse and got agents on the ground in 1961, so that the Australian Prime Minister was able to goad the Americans into faking the Gulf of Tonkin incident in order to decide they were going to bomb the North Vietnamese army in South Vietnam, which is why the Yanks went in and infiltrated, invaded, descended upon Da Nang Air Base, and then the ARVN couldn't keep boundary security, thus and because the US Marines went to Da Nang in 65. But see, hell, this Unseen Perfidy, like you said, he's fresh out of college, which I think American college is what in Australia is the last 2 years of high school. And it's the 2 years you do at high school before you go off to university and start studying for a degree. So yeah, he's young and he's dumb and he's full of hubris and self-righteousness and the idea that America always wins. Well, they didn't win in Vietnam. There's a stalemate in Korea. They were pretty good in Grenada. I think Nicaragua didn't do so good in Iraq. Did bloody awful in Afghanistan. At the moment, the United States government is about to snooker itself and shut down all operations after a summer season where the US Air Force, the US Army, the US Navy and the United States Marines have been so starved of funds that they were not able to put a single aerobatic display team of jet fighters over a single air show anywhere in the United States or its territories or from its bases overseas. America is so bankrupt they can't put the Blue Angels over an air show in America. In California there is one civilian team flying 6 Czechoslovakian-made ex-Soviet era L-39 two-seat jet trainers, and they have been booked solid, run off their feet, trying to cover the air show season. They could have flown 40 air shows. They were flat out flying 11. They normally do 4. And the Americans want to go sabre rattling in Syria? My personal belief on Syria is that the Boeing production facility needs somebody to shoot about 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles, otherwise the production line's going to be laid off because they haven't fired any Tomahawks for a long time. The Dreamliner is a carbon fibre barbecue bonfire sitting on the runway waiting to begin smoking on airports all over the world. But you can't keep going to war forever. At some point, the military intelligence community has to accept the fact that the society is not capable of financing overseas adventures every time you want to take the population's attention away from the failure of your economy. And the American economy is about to completely disappear up its own arsehole, and you're going to have a serious dose of anarchy. If you've got no federal government, it all devolves back to the states, and the state governors command the National Guard. And the National Guard in the excited states of armed Norte Americano, not only are they 3, 4, 5, 7 tour PTSD affected multi-combat veterans, but they've got jet fighters and artillery and armoured cars and tanks. They got some really heavy shit that they can play with disputing the federal government remnant enclave if they want to. I think $100 billion worrying about overseas foreign intelligence security, it's all been wasted. You guys need to worry about the fucking Ku Klux Klan club down the road that's got Uzi submachine guns and a Browning 50 calibre hidden in the basement. Live by the sword, die by the sword. Live by the National Rifle Association, and guess what you get to die from? I would go so far as to say that anybody who says they want to have a war with America for religious reasons because the US lifestyle offends their God, to say that, to believe that, to carry on in such a way is a real-time demonstration of lack of faith. All you have to do to see America disappear up its own armpit is sit on your hands and wait. There is absolutely no need at all whatsoever to take any hostile action against America because they're busy doing it to themselves. The best way to outlive techno-fascist industrial barbarian spasm that has afflicted the globe the past 5,000 years is fuck off away from the population centres, head for the hills and try and figure out some way of life that makes sense under the first principle of biology, which is the more life occupies a space, the more life can occupy the space, because each species creates at least 5 different niches for additional species. This whole military-industrial fantasy began about the time broadacre agriculture kicked off, and all of a sudden there was a desire to feed additional mouths in bad seasons. You know, you could breed up huge numbers and then you got a bad season and all of a sudden you had too many people. So what do? You get the unemployed young men to grab whatever weapons come to hand and you conduct a raid. You get on the road and you go down the road and you steal the resources from somebody who hasn't made a mess of their landscape. The idea that modern technology and science and philosophy have conquered all the obstacles that have confronted previous civilization. What a lot of shit! They simply made a desert and then pissed off with the riches. Gold earrings, gold nose rings, gold necklaces. That was called running money. Because after you got rich making a desert in one place and giving your wife lots and lots of really expensive jewellery, then when the economy crashed and you had to fuck off somewhere else, she put all the wealth in the decorations on her face and head, and off you run. Go and have a look at history. When Egypt failed, Babylon started. Babylon failed. Greece started. Greece failed. Rome started. Rome failed. There was a bit of a dark age. Then the Europeans took Arabian science and they normalised usury, and they applied deficit finance to Arabian science, and they had the Renaissance. And that required all the resources of the Americas, and then Africa, and then Asia, and then Australia and the South Pacific. And finally, eventually, there is no longer any environmental surplus anywhere on the planet. So all of the nations, and I include Australia in this, all the nations who have put their faith in science and economics are about to discover that you can't eat sand and rocks. You have to have organic topsoil. You have to have something to grow your food in. You can't eat dollars. Therefore, thus and because, military intelligence is an oxymoron, and anybody who believes in secret squirrels and spy versus spy to safeguard their way of life is a fucking half-wit. And UnseenPerfidy is such a delirious half-wit that when I left him a comment on his thread, his one response was user blocked, accompanied by I don't speak meth addict. Well, you know what? UnseenPerfidy, I don't speak meth either. I've never ever seen crystal methamphetamine. I've heard of it. I know a bit about the chemistry, the pharmacology, the psychology, the neurology, the neurophysiology involved in the amphetamines, and particularly the fast-acting ones. Pretty sure the Japanese were the first to distribute crystal methamphetamine on a wide scale to their civilian population as well as their military. Back in the days when the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Corps, because America didn't have an Air Force during the Second World War, no fucking Air Force, no National Air Force, an Army Air Corps, a US Naval Aviation Wing. Don't know whether the Marines had an aviation wing at that time, but there was no US Air Force in the Second World War. The US Army Air Corps were giving out amphetamine and dexedrine. The British Royal Air Force and the RAAF and the RCAF, they were giving out dexedrine and amphetamines. Benzedrine to the bomber crews. You know, here, take your little wakey pills. Now, don't call me a meth addict. It's not part of my culture. I'm a pacifist and a vegetarian. I drink alcohol and I sit on my arse in a hammock. On a clearing, or in a clearing, on the edge of a clearing, on an endangered species sanctuary. Watching while the world goes to hell in a handbasket because of self-righteous, hubristic fuckwits like the sceptical heretic and UnseenPerfidy. Damn them. They've damned themselves. They've damned themselves because they don't believe in cosmic scoreboard effect and they think it's okay for them to do shit they don't want anybody else to do to them. Not much I can do about it. Hell, not much you can do, although you're trying harder than me and you're a whole lot more diplomatic and pleasant about it, you know, like you're trying to give them a few tips from Granny's generation sort of thing. I don't know that they're listening though. You know, they've grown up on John Wayne and then graduated on Rambo. Yeah? They think if there'd just been another 15 helicopters, then Black Hawk Down would have been a success. They don't get it. They don't get it. Do unto others applies to America as well. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it, Ella. I think you're doing a great job talking to a bunch of people who are ideologically incapable of understanding the point that you're making. But I'm glad somebody's trying to make it to them anyway, because it means that years later, when their whole life turns to turds, they're never going to be able to complain that they've never heard of such ideas. Right? By explaining it to them, slowly and repeatedly and in terms that they can understand, you take away their excuse of ignorance. So, good on you, Ella. Keep on keeping on. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.